The world held its breath. It was October 1962. The Cold War cast a long shadow. The United States and the Soviet Union, armed with nuclear weapons, stood as rivals. Distrust ran deep. Fear was a constant companion. Then, a discovery. Soviet missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. The threat was clear. Nuclear war felt imminent. President John F. Kennedy found himself at a crossroads. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev had made a bold move. He had brought the Cold War to America's doorstep. The stakes could not be higher. The fate of the world hung in the balance. Kennedy had to act. But any misstep could lead to unthinkable consequences. The tension was palpable. In the Oval Office, Kennedy gathered his advisors. The world watched and waited. Every decision carried immense weight. The eyes of history were upon them. The Cuban Missile Crisis had begun, and the world would never be the same. On October 14, 1962, an American U-2 spy plane soared over Cuba. Its mission routine reconnaissance. But what it captured on film was anything but routine. There, nestled among the Cuban landscape, were Soviet missile installations. The images were chillingly clear. These were not defensive weapons. These were medium-range ballistic missiles capable of reaching the United States. The discovery sent shockwaves through Washington. Kennedy was briefed immediately. The news was grim. The Soviets had lied. They had promised not to place offensive weapons in Cuba. Now they had been caught red-handed. Kennedy knew the gravity of the situation. He understood the threat these missiles posed to the United States. Cuba's proximity to the US made the situation even more dangerous. A nuclear attack could be launched with little warning. American cities were vulnerable. The clock was ticking. Kennedy and his advisors faced an agonizing dilemma. How could they remove the missiles without triggering a nuclear war? Kennedy knew he had to act swiftly and decisively. He considered his options. A full-scale invasion of Cuba was on the table, but it carried immense risks. It could provoke a Soviet response. It could escalate into a nuclear conflict. Kennedy sought another path. He decided on a naval blockade. American warships would intercept any Soviet ships heading to Cuba. The goal was to prevent the delivery of more missiles. It was a risky move, a show of force, but it was also a calculated one. It gave Khrushchev time to reconsider. It gave diplomacy a chance. The world watched with bated breath. The two superpowers were locked in a dangerous standoff. The tension was almost unbearable. Every hour seemed to bring the world closer to the brink. The days that followed were among the most perilous in human history. The White House and the Kremlin became centers of intense activity. Diplomatic channels buzzed with messages. The world held its breath as Kennedy and Khrushchev played a high-stakes game of chess. Each leader was determined to stand firm. Neither wanted to back down. The pressure was immense. On October 22nd, Kennedy addressed the nation. In a televised speech, he revealed the existence of the Soviet missiles. He condemned Khrushchev's actions as reckless and provocative. He announced the naval blockade. He made it clear that the United States would not tolerate this threat to its security. The world listened intently. Kennedy's words were measured but firm. He projected strength and resolve. He also appealed for peace. He called on Khrushchev to choose diplomacy over confrontation. The world waited anxiously for the Soviet response. Section 5. Averting Armageddon. Days turned into nights. The world watched and prayed. The threat of nuclear war loomed large, but amidst the fear and uncertainty there were glimmers of hope. Back-channel negotiations began. Kennedy and Khrushchev, recognizing the abyss before them, opened lines of communication. Messages were exchanged. Proposals were considered. The tension remained palpable, but a sense of urgency prevailed. Both sides knew the stakes were too high for failure. The world held its breath, hoping against hope for a peaceful resolution. Section 6. The weight of decision. The weight of the world rested on Kennedy's shoulders. He knew that any misstep could lead to disaster. He consulted constantly with his advisors. They debated endlessly. Every option carried risks. The pressure was immense, the burden heavy. Kennedy, despite the immense pressure, remained calm and focused. He understood the gravity of the situation. He knew that the fate of the world rested on his decisions. He carefully considered every angle, every consequence. He refused to be rushed into a decision he wasn't sure of. The world watched and waited as the days stretched on. The tension was almost unbearable. But Kennedy knew that he had to make the right decision, no matter how difficult. The future of humanity depended on it. Section 7. Back channels and breakthroughs. As the crisis reached its peak, a breakthrough emerged through back channels. Kennedy and Khrushchev, communicating through intermediaries, found common ground. A deal began to take shape. It was a compromise, but one that offered a way out of the impasse. The terms were clear. The Soviets would dismantle their missile sites in Cuba. In return, the United States pledged not to invade Cuba. Secretly, the US also agreed to remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey. It was a face-saving measure for Khrushchev. The agreement, reached after days of agonizing tension, came as a collective sigh of relief to the world. The immediate threat of nuclear war had receded. The crisis, however, had exposed the fragility of peace in the nuclear age. Section 8. A fragile peace. The Cuban Missile Crisis ended as abruptly as it began. The Soviet ships, having sailed towards Cuba, reversed course. The missile sites were dismantled. The world breathed again. But the crisis left an indelible mark. The world had looked into the abyss of nuclear war. The experience was sobering. It underscored the need for clear communication and restraint. It highlighted the importance of diplomacy in navigating the complexities of the Cold War. The crisis also revealed the limits of brinkmanship. Pushing the world to the edge of destruction was not a sustainable strategy. The lessons of the Cuban Missile Crisis resonated deeply. Section 9. Echoes of Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis, though a defining moment of the Cold War, continues to resonate in the 21st century. It serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of nuclear proliferation. It underscores the need for dialogue and diplomacy in resolving international conflicts. The crisis also highlights the importance of leadership in times of crisis. Kennedy's handling of the situation, though not without its critics, is often cited as an example of cool-headed decision-making under extreme pressure. The lessons of the Cuban Missile Crisis are as relevant today as they were in 1962. In a world still grappling with the threat of nuclear weapons, the need for clear communication, diplomacy, and restraint remains paramount. Section 10. Lessons for a New Millennium. The Cuban Missile Crisis stands as a chilling reminder of how close the world came to nuclear war. It is a story of brinkmanship, miscalculation, and ultimately the triumph of diplomacy over confrontation. The lessons learned during those harrowing 13 days continue to shape international relations today. The crisis highlighted the importance of communication. Misunderstandings and misinterpretations nearly led to disaster. Today, in a world with even more actors on the global stage, clear and open communication is essential to avoid conflict. The Cuban Missile Crisis also underscored the importance of empathy and understanding. Kennedy and Khrushchev, though ideological adversaries, were able to see the world from each other's perspective. This empathy ultimately paved the way for a peaceful resolution. As we navigate the complexities of the 21st century, we must remember the importance of seeing the world through the eyes of others. Only then can we hope to build a more peaceful and just world.